Hi, it's Liz. And I am finally ready to talk a little bit more about some of the experiences I've had with abusive, specifically like pretty classically narcissistic men that are really, that I'm really reminded of following the story with Onision. It's been really weird for me to watch, um, because I didn't know who he was. I mean, I sort of knew that he was a YouTuber. That was kind of it before this whole story broke, or this series of stories. But it's been so important to me, as I've said before, to see the seriousness with which people, in particular Chris Hansen, is taking these stories, because when I experienced similar kinds of things as a young woman, I nobody was taking it seriously. Nobody around me. And I wasn't taking it seriously. And so it took me a long time to I mean, it's complicated. It's really complicated processing this kind of thing because um I did know I was being harmed. And I didn't realize how long the harm would stick with me. And at a certain point, there's a lot of feelings that I had that I sort of suppressed or detached from for a really long time, to just, as I think, just a defense mechanism. But also because it's so normalized, a lot of these things. I mean, unless somebody is jumping out of the shadows and holding a knife to your throat and violently raping you, you know, these kinds of abuse and manipulation and coercion and breaking down of somebody emotionally, um, controlling people emotionally, it's just not taken with enough seriousness. And I think it's sort of looked at in the wrong way. I think we tend to look at things in terms of their physical, tangible effects when judging them really disproportionately. I'm not saying that's not an important part of the equation, but we look at that, but we don't look at, when we're sort of calling this kind of thing out, like what kind of person would do this to somebody else. And we tend to look at, too, the culpability of the victim in terms of, why did they put themselves in that situation? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they say this? And I don't think those are altogether invalid things to think about. How can we better protect ourselves? How can we, um, try to emotionally prepare ourselves to stand our ground, to, have healthy boundaries, to recognize when we're being manipulated, that kind of thing. I think that those are tools that we should have. But the way that we shift blame onto the victim, instead of being like, well, what kind of person would do this? What kind of person would find somebody that they find easy to control because they're young and vulnerable, and then control them in whatever way? Like, that's somebody who needs to stop doing what they're doing. That's somebody that needs to stay away from vulnerable people. That's somebody that, if they're not going to let themselves be accountable and work on it, they're going to have to be somehow, we're going to have to protect vulnerable people from them, right? But that's not the way we want to think about it. Because if the emotional or control or manipulation isn't bad enough, then it somehow doesn't matter the character that they're showing. And I think the thing about something like me, when I follow the story about Onision, I can only think about how much worse things really are than what we know. Because, Shiloh is the oldest of his victims at this point, and she's, mature. She's in her 30s now. She can look back on all of this with the kind of clarity that I can look back on my 20s with, and really say things how they were. A lot of the other victims that are coming forward are still very young, and some of them, you can tell they're still somewhat have normalized some of the things that happened, or there's stuff they don't want to talk about, stuff they're still afraid to talk about, stuff that they minimize, and who knows what's happening with Kai, right? That's a whole other story, but we don't know Kai's story, really. We only know what's been presented to us. And I can only imagine the hellscape that person is living. Which is not to excuse their actions. That's a whole other complicated conversation. When victims of abuse participate in abusing other people, I don't even know how to begin that conversation. But that's for another video, a specific other video that I'll get to someday. Oh. All right. Anyway, sorry, I just started eating something. So, I decided I just kind of wanted to roll a lot of my stories together, because I'm really not interested in doing a call out on anyone right now, mostly because, I'm feeling pretty good today, but, I've just got a lot on my plate, and I am not willing to go to war over stuff that happened 10 plus years ago right now. I don't know if that would be an outcome of me calling people out or not. I don't know if anyone would ever even, anyone relevant would ever even see it, but I'm not willing to risk that. But some of the things that happened to me, man, it's really weird looking back on. Because, for instance, this one guy, when I was 19, I had just gotten involved in this community that was, at the time, really important to me, because as somebody, who's neurodivergent in a number of ways, it was really important to me to be around people I could be myself around, and I'd be valued for that, and I didn't have to mask so much of myself. And so I just found this community, and he was somebody who was a big part of that community. And he decided, I was really interested in, I had never done psychedelics before, and I really wanted to try acid. So he offered to come over while I was house sitting alone and drop acid with me the first time. And what he did was basically oscillate between congratulating me for what a good job I was doing in the sort of paternalistic way, a sort of pseudo shaman kind of thing, and pressure me to have sex. I'm not going to tell the whole story behind that. He didn't wind up raping me. It was gross, though. Let's just say what happened was gross. And in retrospect, I can see that. At the time, though, because I was young and I didn't have a sense of how things should be, I felt like he had respected me. I felt like he had respected my boundaries when, really what he did was walk right up to them, walk all over them, and take a dump on them, but not exactly break them, right? So this is so gross to think about. And he kept pressuring me for sex for years until I finally let him, because that seemed like, honestly, the only viable option for me. I mean, looking back, if that was me today and I was in that situation, I'd be like, fuck no. I would never, I I would not have responded that way, but I'm older now. I have a much better sense of self-respect and boundaries than I did. So, I mean, at the time, it just seemed like my options were losing my community or sleeping with this guy. And I really don't want to lose my community, so so I had engaged, so I did willingly engage in this very coercive, disgusting relationship that I didn't want to be in for years. Um, so yeah, I mean, around the same age, at also 19, um, I was for a while dating this guy who, well, he was like 22 or 23 at the time. When I met him, actually, he was in college and I was in high school. He saw me on a university campus and he started trying to get me to listen to music and come back to his apartment. Um, I mean, to try and sleep with me, you know. And I, at the time, I at least had the sense to be like, I don't know, this seems kind of sketchy. Um, but, when I reconnected with him years later, um, there were some sparks, whatever. But what wound up happening in the relationship, I mean, the dynamic of it was one of control. Like, he just, what it at one point it finally kind of dawned on me that what he wanted from me was not a relationship with a person. What he wanted was like a stuffed animal that he could take everywhere with him and do whatever he wanted and do whatever he wanted to, and that would always be happy and would never have any kind of will of their own. Like, that's what he wanted. um, I didn't even really feel like he was interfacing with me at a point. Like, I was just a stand-in for, like, a body pillow. Like, it was so weird. And at one point, and this is something that really reminds me of, well, he reminds me of Onision anyway, because he had that kind of weird, sort of creepy charisma that tends to only appeal to young people. Like, now, he's the same way. He still has this sort of spastic sense of humor, kind of like Onision. And it's just intolerable to me now. I mean, he's still like that. But at the time, I thought he was so funny, and, it's like now I realize he just tells the same jokes over and over again and does the same little voices, and it's just like, sad. But at the time, I mean, he is a very intelligent person, I think. I think his intelligence has really atrophied. I don't think he's used it well, but I think he is innately a very intelligent person and talented, and he could really use that to, keep me feeling, like I wanted his approval and like I wanted to be around him, even when he'd do so many things that were controlling and objectifying and dehumanizing, and he, just say these horrible things to me. And and like Onision, he would have these rules. I don't even really remember what they are, but he would get mad at me for breaking these rules that he unilaterally decided that we had, and he would enforce these in like stupid ways. Like, he would take away my things. Like, he actually had this friend who had given me this little hat that I really liked. Had little kitty ears, and it was fuzzy, and I liked it. And he would have his friend take it away from me when I displeased him by breaking his rules. until until he decided I was, I had earned it back. And it's not as disturbing as some of the stuff Onision did, like head shaving and that kind of thing. But the same vein, like this weird, like unilateral rules and punishment, and this sort of dynamic where he wanted me to just like be a doll or like be his little girl, and he was constantly lording over me the fact that he was whatever 3 or 4 years older than me, which is like not that much, and if I'm that much less mature than you, then why are you dating me, right? Like, it's weird. I mean, it's weird if you try to think about it rationally, but if you try to think about it as an abuser, it all makes complete sense. Um, and behind the scenes, he was physical with me a few times. One time, I thought for sure he was gonna rape me. Um, and there are a number of times where he started to do things, and I think the only reason that he didn't is because my sort of automatic trauma response is to detach completely and be really flippant. so so instead of like getting scared or like that kind of thing, I'll just kind of like instant detach and just be like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Like kind of attitude. And that would kind of cause him to seemingly snap out of it. But I feel really lucky because I know that he's hurt other women. And I don't know the details, but I know that he has this whole history of violence against women, which disgustingly, a lot of the people around us knew that he already had this past even before me, and they still didn't believe me when I tried to tell them some of the things that he did. But that's a whole other story. Yeah, don't get me started. And then, there's this other guy who also, again, met me around the same time. I think I was 20 when I met him. And I didn't have a romantic relationship with this guy, but it kind of didn't matter because he did a lot of the same things. I mean, he really took advantage of the fact that I was young, in terms of just how he treated me. He, and I was also very vulnerable at the time. But the specific time when he met me was it was right after my first psychosis, and I was really depressed, and I did not have many friends, and I had the lowest self-esteem of my entire life. And he was somebody who was at the time very prominent in the context of the community that I was in. Very prominent, very important. And he took me under his wing, which meant so much to me at the time, right? His attention was very precious to me. And he buttered me up and, love bombed me. And then, I wasn't romantically interested in him. So, it wasn't a big deal that he started dating somebody else. But what he did then was use me to like play these weird games with his girlfriend. Like these weird jealousy games. Like he would kiss me, touch me. He even like came up behind me and non-consensually groped me once when she could see it. That was one of the first times I met her. Like it was super weird. He was just like playing these mind games, and I kind of felt at the time like, again, this is just kind of what I have to do to be in this community. Like I just have to put up with this, being treated this way. I mean, at least I'm getting attention, right? Because this is how young people who don't have a fully formed self, it takes until you're about like 25 or 26, I think, to like have your brain fully formed. And I really feel that when I look back, because that age was a huge turning point for me. I really started to see things differently. The whole way I lived my life and the way I made decisions changed really radically. The way I related to people, everything changed at that age. But before that, it was, I just didn't have the sense of, I didn't understand the degree to which I was being taken advantage of. And that is why people like that choose young people. Um, and he just continued to play these games. I mean, long story short, it's such a long story, of kind of eventually it was oscillating back and forth between showing me all of this love and affection and sexual interest to just utterly trashing me to everyone, to my face, spreading rumors about me, trying to get me fired from my job, which I don't think he realized was an unpaid internship, so, and he didn't succeed. But that's not the point. It was just like, it was just going back and forth from like extreme hostility to like apparent, intimacy, until it finally reached a fever pitch. And now he acts like I was never very important, you know. I mean, even though I know from plenty of third parties that I definitely was important to him in whatever weird way that an extreme narcissist can find someone important, because that guy is like off the charts. Like, it's just, so yeah, so that's basically like the brief summary of some of the stuff I experienced as a young woman from people that really remind me of Onision. And, I'm not trying to like diagnose people, but there's certain sort of characteristics that get termed, narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic abuse. I'm just really seeing those patterns echoed in the stories about Onision. And again, I mean, it's really heartening to me that people are starting to take these things seriously, because, some of these people harmed me more or less I mean, all of them did things ultimately that were very tangible, that hurt me. Some more than others, though, right? But it wasn't necessarily those things that hurt the most. And that's what I wish people understood. The way that all of those people hurt me the most was psychologically. Warping my sense of self, warping my sense of self-worth, my sense of boundaries, relationships. That's mostly what I have had to heal from. Hearing their voices of criticism and derision in my mind for years after I stopped talking to them. That kind of thing. That, having to think about, well, what would they think about, where my life is right now, or what I look like right now, or, whatever. Because they manipulated me to depend on their approval and to want their attention. And that's the kind of thing that's deeply hurtful. And that's something I see really strongly in all of the stories about Onision is, even not even just the stories, but the whole thing, like I said in that other video, that whole thing about, all his ratings, all his way of like rating people. Like, That's a perfect example, because it's something that people might say, like, oh, well, what's wrong with that? Nobody's getting hurt. They're all consenting. They're not all adults, but even if they were all consenting adults, you know, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with somebody who's setting themselves up as an authority to have other people's confidence and self-worth depend on their ratings of them. Ratings, reducing them to numbers, their personal objectification of those people, making people psychologically dependent. Like, it's that's wrong. That's a huge red flag, that this person is not a safe person, and we need to address that. Like, yeah, sure, young women could make better choices. But that's the thing, is young women are young women, and young men are young men. Young people are young people. Young people are not in a position to always make good choices. So you're just not able to. You don't have the full capacity to always make good choices. That's not a reasonable expectation of young people. Young people need to be able to make mistakes and still be safe. It's the people who are exploiting that need to be held accountable. Okay,